Today, in honor of Veterans Day, we are going to honor those who have served in the United States Armed Forces. And what better way to do that than to sit down with a few of them right now? I'm Scott Schenkel, and I'll be your host for this episode of The Viking Voice. So we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves and maybe tell us what branch you served in and when. So we'll start over here.
All right, I'm Donald Jordan. I served in the Navy in submarines 1955 through 1959.
Hello, my name is Michael Hafke. I served in the United States Army and the New Jersey Army National Guard from 1986 till I retired in 2012.
Hi, I'm Jim Finney, one of the older ones here. I served in World War II and Korea from 1943 when I was 16 years old until 1954 in the Korean War when I finally got out and retired from the service. And was a combat infantryman, ranger, paratrooper, and special forces, and most of my missions were behind the enemy line. A prisoner of war.
All right, well, it's great to have you guys here. And I'm kind of curious, why did you join the armed forces? You know, did you have maybe a family member pushing you? Did you sort of just want to join?
No, I joined because I was an orphan. At 13, my father passed away, and at 15, my mother passed away. So I couldn't afford college, and I went down to my older brother. He had previously joined the Navy after Pearl Harbor, and he was my hero. So I thought that I would go down and see what the Navy had to offer. And I went down and I took a battery of tests, and they said, "Do you qualify for electronics school?" And I said, "Really? I have no idea what makes a flashlight work." He said, "Don't worry about that, we'll teach you." And that's what motivated me to join.
I can remember being a little kid and just looking at family photo albums and you know, seeing my father's time in the military as well as my grandfather's, and you know, growing up watching war movies on TV, I always had a strong interest in the military. So growing up, I can honestly say that I never thought about college. I just knew that as soon as I graduated high school, I was going to go into the military.
I was lucky. I grew up in Massachusetts in a family that came over on the Mayflower. So I'd had a youth of the family of grandfathers and grandfathers and grandfathers and grandmothers who served in the military in every war, including working with the Indians back in Plymouth and the French and Indian War, the Revolutionary, the Civil War. Our cousin got the Medal of Honor in the Civil War in the Navy, one of the fourth Medal of Honor given to William Finney. And as a family, we were steeped in our history. And we had the books Grandpa had. He was a captain in World War I, infantry for 4 years in the trenches. And his library in the upstairs hall was crowded with books from James Madison, Jefferson, Hamilton, and even Madison's letters to his wife, Dolly, and the whole set of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. And as a kid, when we visited Gramp, whenever I had a chance and didn't have to work in the yard on the farm, I'd sit down and grab a book and read, and just enthralled with the history of it all, and then try to talk to Gramp, but because of the war and his post-traumatic stress, he would never open up with me, which left me with a hole, so to speak. And then at the family, we always talked every night. Dinner was 6 o'clock religiously, every night. And everybody had to be there at dinner, I mean, unless somebody was sick. And we would first listen to the news on the radio for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'd have family discussion. We always prayed. We always had family discussion of what we had been doing during the day or what was happening in the world. And I can remember talking with the family in 1933 and 34 about the rape of Nanking in China by the Japanese, one of the beginnings of the horror of World War II. Well, so I had that patriotic feeling. And with my buddy, closest buddy from school, we grew up together, went to school together, played hockey together, and ran cross country and were in Boy Scouts together, and got involved in the early pre-war stuff. And when the 41 came in Pearl Harbor, I was sick in bed Pearl Harbor Day, and heard it on the radio about the bombing, and ran downstairs and told everybody who was at the dining room table, about 22 people at the time, some relatives who were with us, the war had started. And within 1 week, my oldest brother signed up. Within a year, next two brothers signed up, and told me not to sign up because I was the young brat and I had to stay home and take care of my sister and my mother and father. But I said, okay, with my hands and my fingers crossed. I can remember it today. And when we were 16, Benny and I both already wanted to go, and we went and lied about our age, and they took us. And we went to training.
Gotcha. Do you have any kids?
Oh, yes.
Did
I
they
have
serve?
a handicapped kid and a daughter with 3 marvelous one boy, 2 girls, all top students and top athletes. Unfortunately, they live in New Zealand at the present time because my daughter's husband was a New Zealander. And I now have a great-grandson, my first one. But my youngest granddaughter just received, she's already a top athlete in New Zealand, and she just got yesterday distinction for 11th grade, distinction in science, so pretty proud.
That's awesome. How about you guys? Do you guys have any kids?
I have 3 children, 2 boys and a daughter. All 3 of my kids graduated here from Voorhees in 2006, 8, and 10.
Any of them serve?
But my youngest son, he's in the Air Force right now, and my older son did 6 years with the New Jersey Army National Guard.
Okay.
So he joined, they had a great program at the time. I'm not sure if they still have it, but it was free college for in-state schools. So he got a free education and is a physical education teacher now.
Wow.
Great.
How about you?
I have a son and daughter. My son graduated, both of them graduated North. My son opted not to go into service, and my daughter, he's got a degree in business, and he's a director for the Avis Budget Corporation up in North Jersey. He has responsibility for all of Canada, Alaska to California, Hawaii, the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. It's 41% of all your rates for residential cars rented from Avis Budget. My daughter is a registered school counselor. She also graduated from North, and she's working on her professional counseling degree to be able to counsel outside of an educational environment. Your next question is going to be, what was boot camp like? Well, I got to tell you, that's where I can joke about it. There are no telephones in boot camp. Of course, you have a telephone today and you can't live without it. But when you're in boot camp, you were threatened, write a letter once a week to your parents, even if just to say how you're doing. And you had to write that letter, and that was, if you didn't, you marched. Now, the Navy marches in boot camp. We had drill teams and we marched. When we got shots, we marched. And we exercised what we call a piece. That was your weapon. And at the time, it was an old Garand rifle. You had to train on every piece of equipment that you would see on a surface ship. Load a 5-inch gun, how it performed. You had to know all the ratings in the service when you went to boot camp. You learned tradition, why you wore bell bottoms. Can anybody tell me that? Well, I'll tell you the answer. You wore a bell bottom for the tradition that they used to have on sailing ships, because they used to roll their pants up past their knees so you could scrub the wooden teak decks on a sailing ship. And it's all tradition. You had 13 buttons on your uniform, and the 13 buttons are for the 13 original colonies in the United States, 13 original states. You had a flap on the back, and it was lined with white, and your dress uniform. And everybody says, why do you got that flap back there? Well, in the days of sailing ships, the sailors used to grow their hair long, and to keep it from getting windy and blown all over the place, they put tar on their hair. And they used to put a piece of canvas around their neck and tie it, and that's transferred into part of their uniform. Tradition. Everything is tradition, but no telephones. Another thing, we didn't have washing machines. We had a scrub board, and you wore your white uniforms and you scrubbed them. You scrubbed them and you scrubbed them in a big concrete tub. And you scrubbed them and you scrubbed them until they were clean. No washing machines. And then they took and they hanged all of their clothes on a clothesline. And then after the clothes were dry, you folded them very carefully and put them underneath your bunk. And by sleeping on them, you creased them all. Took out all the creases, but you had to fold them just so. And you creased them so you turned them inside out, and then when you folded them, they were creased inside. So all the creases were just the opposite of the creases on my pants. The creases were in towards your leg rather than on the outside. Everything was tradition in the Navy. The Navy today is totally different. But we didn't have cell phones.
That's very true. And that's quite a lot of information. Does anybody have anything to add, maybe, from your boot camp experiences?
Like Don said, I can remember going to my basic training, which was Fort McClellan, Alabama, and pretty much everything was the same that I expected it to be. You know, when you go into the military, you know you're going to get yelled and screamed at no matter what you do. It's going to be considered wrong just to give the drill sergeant something to yell at you about. But I remember our senior drill sergeant instructing everybody, you will write a letter home at least once a week, because I don't want to get any phone calls from your parents saying that they're worried about you. So back in those days, it was before cell phones, so there was a pay phone that after like the first 3 weeks, we were able to make a phone call to say we're doing okay, and but everybody had to get in line and pull out their quarters or get a phone card to call home. But it was definitely a memorable time for me. I spent 5 months down in Alabama, and it was just everything that I expected the Army to be. Just doing a lot of field maneuvers, yelling and screaming, loss of sleep, a lot of weapon qualifications, nonstop spit shine in your boots, and only to go out into the field and get them all muddy within 10 minutes. And it was just good times to really think back and remember on.
Yeah, training was wonderful. Benny and I, when we went in, it was just 43, and they were trying to get ready to get a lot of troops over in Europe for a Normandy landing in 44 June. And so we were put on accelerated training programs, and we had less. They usually have between 9 and 12 months for combat infantry plus maneuvers, and almost the same amount of time for a Ranger paratrooper with maneuvers and everything down in Florida. And then for the Special Forces, the same kind of heavy training. But they accelerated ours, and we had it all in less than half the time. And we had 24/7. We had no days off except for one Sunday I was allowed to go to church. We were only allowed to make a phone call once a month to our home. We did have to write the letter. And the spit and polish and the hard times, expected and good. I had a great trainer, and Benny and I were young and good students and good athletes, and I weighed 135 pounds, but I was a muscle. And Benny was taller and bigger than I. He weighed about 155, 60, and he was a good athlete. We'd race each other, and it would depend on who would win. But we were cocky kids. We felt we were better than most of the guys who we were training with. And our sergeant was a survivor of Merrill's Marauders in Burma, and Sergeant Ross. And his corporal was Corporal Rodriguez. I can still remember the names. Two wonderful men who had been in battle, and they were great. They were tough. And one day, I'll tell you a humorous thing. One day we were going to have, every day the platoon would line up in a circle, and the sergeant would be in the middle, and he'd say, okay, today and this given day, he said, we're going to have bayonet practice. Well, like a fool, I leaned over to Benny and whispered too loud, oh, this will be a snap. And Sergeant Ross heard it and said, Finney, front and center. And you want me, Sarge? And front and center. And as I got in front of him, he threw his M1 rifle at me with a bayonet on it. And I was still holding my own, and I didn't dare drop either one of them. And he said, give me yours. And I gave him his. He said, okay, you're so bright and you're so intelligent. You take me on. Show me what you can do. You want me to take you on, Sarge? And I mean, it was a scary moment for us. And yeah, obviously. So I thought for maybe 10 seconds, no longer. I didn't dare because he was waiting. And I said, well, I'll try to fake him out and move in and give him an uppercut and see how I do. Well, 5 seconds later, I was out cold on the ground. Never knew what hit me, and I never touched him. And when I finally came out of it, he said, well, you get my point about we're going to training today? and from then on, I was more attentive.
I know we spoke before, and you said that you were in some wars, but were either of you guys in a war?
I was activated in 2004, my National Guard unit, and was activated almost 2 years. I spent 12 months in Iraq. Once I got over to Iraq, I was chosen to be part of a 10-man team to train Iraqi soldiers. So at that time, it was still early on in the Iraq War, and I was in Saddam's hometown of Tikrit, and we were a group of 10 American soldiers training 360 Iraqi soldiers in the 4th Iraqi Army Division. So when we returned back to the States after our tour was complete, we were replaced by the 101st Airborne Division, but when we arrived in country, there had not been any established training teams. So for me, it was a very unique experience getting to, work daily with the people that, just a year before that we'd been fighting against. And, for many years, there was, a strong, probably a dislike or a fear of each other, but, working daily with them through the use of translators, it was, very eye-opening to see really what a great bunch of guys that they were, and something that I'm still able to stay in contact with on Facebook today.
Wow, that's amazing. Were you in any wars?
We had our 50th reunion down in Kings Bay, Georgia, in the sheltered. The submarines are hidden in shelters, so they can't be spotted by and identified by satellite. Russian satellites fly over us. And we had our reunion. It was the first reunion we had in 50 years. And we were hugging each other, and we bonded very tightly on a submarine because of all the experiences we had. One specifically happened to us. If you can picture the outside of a submarine pretty much like a cigar-shaped steel hull, and then you picture vanes on it, well, there'll be another tank on the top, which is the conning tower. And then there'll be vanes on it, which came down from your main exhaust, or your main induction, where you get your air from when you're on the surface. And this goes to the breathing and the air conditioning for your crew. And it also branches out to two 18-inch diameter lines that go back for each of the 2 engine rooms. Now, in each engine room, we have 2 diesel engines the same size that's on a locomotive. So that means we got 4 locomotives on board a submarine. And on the back of the diesel engine is a big, huge generator. And the diesel drives the generator when you're on the surface. And it sucks the air down this tube, and it gets plenty of air. Now, what happened was we were operating off the coast of Cuba. We were stationed in Key West, so we decided not to go east, to go to Guantanamo Bay, where we had to operate with the entire East Coast fleet. But what we did is we went around the western, and the reason we went around the western corner of Cuba and down to Gitmo was because we didn't want to go through the Eastern Triangle. You heard of that between Puerto Rico, Miami, and Bermuda. That point there, a lot of things fell into the ocean. It's like a big sinkhole. But we're discovering a lot about it. So we went around, and the Navy has a situation where they never want to waste money. So when you're en route, go down to Guantanamo Bay, which was originally a coaling station for sailing ships. After the sailing ships changed from over to coal to make steam, and from that time on, Guantanamo Bay was a coaling station, and we had leased it from Cuba, and that we just kept leasing it, and we still have it today. So we were going around, and the fleet comes down, and they operate with us. We play the target submarine. Well, what I was stationed, when we were underway, the Navy always makes good use of us. So we started this morning, in the morning, we started and we dove after breakfast down. And when you dive in the morning, you have saddle tanks on the side of a submarine. And what happens is the tanks are open on the bottom and you just control the air escaping. So they fill up with water. As it fills up with water, when you open up the valves, the air blows on the outside and the submarine gets heavier and dives down. Now you close your induction and you shut down the engines and you switch over to battery power. Now your batteries are about like this, like about that size, and they're about 4.5 foot tall. And each battery holds 52 gallons of electrolyte, and there are 126 cells in the forward battery and 126 cells in the after battery. So when you go down, the generators generate the power. The batteries provide the power to drive the shafts. They have the motors mounted right around the shafts. Now in each motor housing there's 2 armatures and they're attached directly to the shaft. So what happens is you switch over from your generators to your batteries, close up all the hatches, and you dive down and you switch over to battery power. So we were diving down at 400 feet working with aircraft. And we start out at about 120 feet and then we balance out. And as you burn fuel, and we're driving all night long, as you burn fuel, a strange thing happens. The fuel tanks, they're open on the bottom, so the water pressure pushes the fuel into the boat. And we call a submarine a boat. The water pressure pushes the fuel into the tanks as you need it. So you open the valve and you get all the fuel coming into the submarine, into a tank. Now it's called a fuel oil tank. So what happens is you got to make clean fuel oil from that because you got a little bit of salt water in the mix. So you take and you run it through a centrifuge. The heavier water goes out and goes down, and the lighter fluid stays in the middle and goes down into the clean fuel oil tanks. So what happens is we were down at 400 feet after making a dive, which you call your preparation dive in the morning. After running all night, you get heavier because the fuel you use is replaced with salt water, and salt water is heavier than fuel. So in order to get neutral buoyancy, you go down and then you start moving your fuel, and you start moving your water tanks, the water back and forth, and like this, back and forth, and you have to balance out your tanks so you get a nice neutral buoyancy. And when you go down, you just stay down like this. Then when you got that neutral buoyancy, then you're able to go along. So we were down at 400 feet, and all of a sudden, we just start like a normal working day. We're working with aircraft, and what they're doing, they have a piece of equipment on board that's called MAD equipment, magnetic anomaly detection. Now what that is, there's lines of force going from north to south around the Earth all over the time. And when you got a magnet, a steel hulled submarine interfering with those magnetic lines that are running from north to south, you get a little zigzag, but you have to cross it exactly. And what we would do at the time, when they'd say mad, mad, we had an underwater telephone that we used to talk to the airplanes with. And they would indicate that they were going to drop a hand grenade and a dye marker. And what we would do then, we would blow a bubble up, and if the bubble came close to the dye marker, they knew that they hit us. But typically, they were way off. So they said, bubble, bubble. And we said, we did bubble. And they say, well, missed again, you know. So it would continue like that en route to Gitmo. Then all of a sudden, we're operating, and the operator on the aircraft, he says, I got a malfunction in my electronic equipment. I have to go back to base. And just about that time, all of a sudden, we felt on board like we ran into a mountain. Well, everybody knows there's no mountains down here. We're in 3,000 feet of water. So I can say this day we earned our hazardous duty pay. What happened was, within an instant, the submarine started tilting down to a 35-degree angle, and we started going way past our test depth. So immediately we have compressed air in tanks on board, and they pressurized that, brought the pressure in until people couldn't stand it no more. You start equalizing when they increase the pressure inside the hull. And then we tried to figure out what's going on. So we're going down, and then they said, get back to the engine room. They told me, I was on the switchboard, get back to the engine room and find out what is actually going on. Well, everybody was on the sound-powered phone circuit that we had communicated back and forth, and everybody was listening, but people were, being a senior senior petty officer, I was sent all the way back into the engine room to find out what was going on. And what had happened is, all of a sudden, the valve that closes down was leaking like a shower, and it was spraying salt water over all the engine room, all the electronic equipment. And I had to go climbing up to the engine room because the ship was tilting down like this. So I had to climb through and open each compartment door that were slammed shut and go through the compartment and finally get into the engine room. And when I got there, I saw all of this water sprinkling all over the place. And I got on the I told the guy on the sound-powered phone circuit, I said, tell him we're taking water in the engine room and everything is spraying all over the engine room. Get us up to the surface as fast as you can. And meanwhile, the people in the next compartment after the engine rooms were the electronics people. They were controlling the motors, and they were backing up as hard as they could. Well, in order to back up as hard as you could, you take the batteries that are operating in parallel, and you have to come to all stop, and then you have to switch them into series, and then you have to put them a little at a time into series 1 and series 2 and bring the motors. You're starting to back up. Well, that's called all back flank, and that's all back emergency. And we were going, and all of a sudden, I heard this tremendous sound, and as the submarine was going deeper and deeper, it squeals and groans because of the pressure on the pressure exerted on the submarine. Well, we knew what the burst speed, we knew what the burst pressure was in depth, and we were approaching that. But because we had the pressure and our ears were popped, the pressure started pushing out on the hull again, opposing the pressure as you're going deeper. Well, we were going deeper, and then all of a sudden this noise started, and the propellers were sending columns of water alongside the hull, and they were banging on the side of the hull because we were so deep. And it was like a thunder on the outside. And everybody was going to say, boy, I sure hope those guys up at Electric Boat that built this submarine paid attention to dynamics in college and got it right. But slowly but surely, the submarine started backing, and the bow, they blew all the tanks they could, and the bow started creeping up slowly. And then very slowly, and it took almost 45 minutes in total time to get the ship to come up. And it's backing up like this, and we blew the bow buoyancy, which are the forward tanks, and we carefully maneuvered up, but you couldn't come up too much because in the engine room there was so much water in the bilges that came in, salt water in the bilges, that we were worried about it would get into the generators, and if you came up at too much of an angle, all the bilge water would lean to the back and started coming up on the tank, up on the walls, what we call the bulkhead. It would start going to the back and then raising up. But what happened is, all of a sudden, the captain takes control and he brings it up at a very slow angle so that doesn't happen. In the generators, we always have air pressure going on to keep them clean, and they're all painted white inside, and we have a light that turns on, and we can look inside and see that there was no water getting in. And that slight amount of pressure kept any other water from getting in, because we would be really up an unknown creek without sufficient means of propulsion, as they say. So we came up very slowly, and then we finally got onto the surface, and we're rocking back and forth, and we asked, what's going on? Immediately they sent a damage control up on the bridge and got onto the bridge, and the damage control guys made a quick patch of what was going on, but then nobody was talking. So we worked for 48 hours constantly, and if a person couldn't stand it anymore and just take a nap for a couple hours, they were allowed to do that, but everybody else was pitching in, and you couldn't make any electricity, or you couldn't use the stoves. Everything is electric on a submarine. So what they were doing, it was most important that we had to get at least one engine working. So what happened was we went in and we opened up the controllers that control the motors. It was like a big switch. And here they were all sprayed with salt water. Well, salt water and electricity don't get along. And they started sparking as soon as you put the fuses in. So you had to pull the fuses out. And then first thing we did, we took hot steaming water from the engines and sprayed it on these electrical contacts. And then the next thing we did is we sprayed a trichloroethylene, which is a dry cleaning solution, that we sprayed that with 2 25-pound air in a 5-gallon can. You put a tube in the air, you put a tube in the can, and you have 2 25-pound air, and you blow this stuff on. And then you take a megger, and a megger is one that finds out how much insulation you have for your motors or your contactors. And then when you got those dry, then you put in the fuse and disconnect the motor and keep the fields on the outside warm to dry it out. And then when they got that done, they put the fuses in to the rest of the controller, and then all of a sudden you got one engine working that way. And we did that to all 4 engines. And when we pulled into port in Key West, we came around, and all of the crew on the tender, a big ship that takes care, it's like a factory ship that takes care of submarines. All the crew was aligned on the side, watching us make the turn for the submarine piers. There are 5 piers, and you could land on either side. As soon as we tied up on one of our piers, the next thing that happened, the diving barge came over and is next to us. And then they cut part of the decks off of the submarine. They cut the covering off the submarine, which is the decks and the sides, and they lifted it up into the air and set it on the pier with this big, huge boom. It took about 2 hours to get it all off. And there was an 18-inch pipe that had imploded from water pressure. And we said, holy mackerel, we had 19 ton hooked onto the submarine at test depth, and we're at neutral buoyancy, and we managed to survive. And that's my story.
What would you say your biggest challenge was during your military career?
Surviving. Combat brings a variety of emotions. War under any circumstances, and every war is different, but every war has its own hell. And I guess the hardest thing on overall is being able to keep control of your own emotions. So with the grace of God and fate and luck, if you are one of those like me who was one of the lucky ones, you managed to live until you're almost 90 and maybe a little longer. My first experience on D-Day, we well trained, even though it was accelerated. Boy, we were ready to go. And when we got to England and In May of '44, we were sent to Scotland, and I had special landing instructions, and we were with the Rangers, the 75th 2nd Battalion, who were going to climb the cliff where the great big guns on Point du Hoc were located. But we were unseasoned. We were replacements. We had just arrived. And the regular guys who had been already in battle were going to actually do the climbing of the cliff, 100-foot cliffs of Du Hoc. The rest of us in reserves were attached to the 29th Division, 116th Infantry, and for landing on the second wave at Omaha Beach. And we had training for that, and a British sergeant pulled Benny and I aside because he knew we were the youngest of everybody there, and really knew nothing about what we were heading for on Normandy. And he ordered us to meet with him for lunch for a week up in Scotland. And he spent time telling us special things that we needed to do when we were in the water and landing, and special things that we would need to know when we got into the winter about freezing parts of your body and what you do to save from frostbite, and what you need to protect yourself from bombardments and shells and everything while you're constructing foxholes. Although we had had training about all of those things, he gave us some just wonderful special insights of his own experience as a British commando earlier in the war that saved my life. But let's talk about that horror of when you first go. You honor, duty, service is drilled into us, and we feel it strongly. But when you get in that boat and you're waiting, and we had to wait for 3 days, and the terrible waves of the English Channel, which because of the storms, and half of the guys in the boat, we had over 3,000 guys on a Liberty ship, crowded aboard 5 high, and you took turns being up above and getting air and being below. But half of the guys were vomiting with seasickness. Thank God I didn't get seasick. But finally, the day of the landing came, and the ocean was still terribly high. Waves were 8, 10, 12 feet high above normal. And tanks, we had tanks out there with rubber flotation things around the tanks to help keep them afloat from the water and the waves. But still, for the first 2 landings, 50 tanks were supposed to land on the first wave at Omaha, and 150 tanks were supposed to land on the second wave a half hour later. And of those 200 tanks, 50% never even made it to shore. They were either blown up or they were flooded by the water from the waves and the bombs and mines going off near them. And 5 men in a tank, an American Sherman tank, 5 men, they all had life preservers to give them a chance to get out if the boats were inundated. And we saw a tank go down, get blown up, and men jumping into the water tank, and we pulled. Our LCT landing craft had 32 men with a lieutenant and a sergeant in charge of all of us, mostly 29th Division, but a few of us from the Rangers and Special Forces. And we pulled in at least 6 guys, tank men, who were half drowned, into our landing craft as we were moving in. I missed out one thing. A half hour before the landing was to start, the launch of us was to start, the bombardment was to take place. And holy moly, you have no idea of the noise, the shudder, the flashes that scared the living bejesus out of you before you were even going to move forward to start trying to land. The noise, the loudest firecracker 4th of July celebration you ever went through is nothing. It stays with me now. And until 2.5 years ago, I never talked, for 72 years, I never talked to anybody, not even my wife, about some of the things that I experienced. But a few friends, my son's handicapped, and I've been involved with Special Olympics and golf and basketball and a host of other sports with the Special Olympics for 50 years. And a few of the guys knew that I'd been in combat, and we would be walking around golfing with the kids, and they would just slowly, hey Jim, tell us about what was the landing like. And slowly I let just a little bit out, not much. I just couldn't talk about it. My sense of guilt, my sense of remorse, my sense of horror, my sense of, all kinds of emotions. Just wouldn't, but I did. And then in 1998, Saving Private Ryan came up. How many you guys saw Saving Private Ryan?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't my company, but I was in a company right beside him. And it's a very factual and extremely well done. Tom Hanks did a superb job in it. And the story is so true. Ryan, who you saw standing at the cemetery, St. Mary Église on Normandy Beach, having had his tearful moments by himself with his family in the background of the buddies who were lying in front of him. When his family joined him, turns to his wife and kids and just says, approximately, tell me, dear, tell me that I've lived a good enough life and been a good enough man to deserve the privilege of standing here today. And that's where I was. That's where all men who've gone through the horrors of war end up. We called it battle fatigue when in World War II. Today it's post-traumatic stress. A human body goes through, first you have that sense of duty and honor and pride and excitement. I wanted to go to war. I wanted to fight the Germans. I wanted to fight the Japs. Both Finney and I did, and almost 90% of everybody. There were some who really didn't want to go into combat, and that's another story for another day. It's not their fault. They just froze and couldn't. But those of us who did and had the desire to do it, then when you actually get there and you start moving forward, and that noise, the fear, scared out of you, bejeebies, and yet your duty takes over, and you know you've got to do what you've got to do, and so we move forward, and fear goes to honor and duty, and then it goes into my God, we saw these boats and the first wave guys being killed and bombed and drowning and red blood and explosions going on. And so it goes into rage and then hatred, all in a short span of 10 minutes. The lieutenant, when we finally got in close 200 yards from the shore, water still over our heads, the lieutenant, and they lowered the ramp, and the lieutenant took the first step into the water. His foot didn't touch the water before a machine gun bullet took his head. The sergeant was next, and he got in the water and went up to, they had barriers in the water, barbed wire and mines. And the sergeant made it up to the first barrier, but he went to where there was a mine, and he exploded. And then we had to get in and go on our own. We had no officers, nobody in telling us what to do. I didn't know my ass from my elbow. I weighed 135 pounds. I was carrying with a Bangalore and my M1. I was carrying 230 pounds. And we went in the water and got heavier. And the water was 10 and 11 feet deep. And we've been trained. We had to go all the way down to the bottom of the water, get on the sand of the beach, and crouch. Because if you stay up and try to kick your feet and stay above, you're going to be killed. So you go down and you open your eyes and you look ahead and you watch for the pings of the machine gunners, which are raking the beach and the water from the German positions. And you also look at the barriers and try to point out those poles, because you knew those poles were going to have a mine on them. So you wanted to go some other place. And you helped each other as buddies, taking turns watching that and getting up for air and moving forward. And how did we move forward? We were instructed to take either a dead body that was floating or a live one, preferably, so that maybe, and put them on top of our heads to protect us. Take a wounded American body and put them on your head, and try to get into the shore by watching where those mines are. And by the grace of God, Benny and I made it to the shore, both with a wounded warrior. I had no idea if he lived. Then we had 200 yards of more barriers and mines getting to the edge of the cliff where we were safe, because they were still strafing and bombing and everything else on the walls. And we had Bangalores. Do you know what a Bangalore is? A Bangalore is a 5-foot approximate size tube, metal tube, filled with 10 pounds of TNT. And you come in sections. You can build them to sections. We had to build 4 rows of between 60 and 85 feet to get up. There were 4 crevices in the wall, the 100-foot wall, that would allow for, with Bangalores and tanks and bombs and everything else, to make space for tanks and trucks and troops to get up the wall without having to climb the actual face of the wall. And the Bangalores were critical to blow up the barriers, the barbed wire and the barriers that they had built. Well, when we got up to the edge of the wall to do that, half of the men who were carrying other Bangalores on my Bangalore team, 8 men on a team, had already been wounded or killed, and the Bangalores weren't with us. So we had to drop our bags, crawl back and run back any way we could, and find additional Bangalores to get them back up so we could put the Bangalore together to blow up the path. And by the grace of God, we made it. We were supposed to get the first and second wave. We were supposed to have taken the top with all the gun emplacements, and they had 5-story bunkers on the tops of those cliffs. 5 stories below. There were little cities inside. They had hospitals. They had thousands of men, and machine guns, and the big guns, and the 88s, and the mortars, and mined all over. We were supposed to go 5 miles inland before the end of the first day. 200,000 men landing. 243,000 actually landed the first day. Of that 5 miles, we made it 1,000 yards the first day. And we had no sleep, no food, no break, nothing, and didn't know who we were under whose command because everybody was separated. Some of the boats that were supposed to land with us at Omaha were landed 1,000 because of the water and the waves and the bombs and barriers, landed 1,000, 2,000 yards down the road. And so it was, we almost lost D-Day, but it was a great success. But we didn't get a break for 3 days. And I'll just tell you one final, before the hell of everything else that came after that. I went through 5 major battles and became prisoner of war on one of our missions, and I did 24 missions back to the enemy lines and lost a lot of men. And on the 3rd day, we were totally exhausted, hadn't had anything to eat, no sleep. A sergeant from the 29th Division said, "We've been told to take a break. There's a lull. The Germans have been pulling back for some reason. We don't know what, but we got a lull. You guys are told, go find yourself a quiet place to lie down, eat something, get some sleep, and listen for my yell in the morning, and we'll get you sorted and get you headed to your Ranger Special Forces outfit." And so the 3 of it, Benny and I, and a kid, his name Freddie from the 29th Division. I didn't even know his last name. He was from the 29th Division, and he was lost like I was. We all sauntered over to a little blown out cottage, French cottage, lovely home of some poor French family. The roof was blown out, the inside was destroyed, just broken furniture and dust and dirt and rubble. And the first thing we did when we got into that place is we just got together and hugged each other and cried. And I think we cried for at least a half an hour, maybe longer. Finally, we came to, we ate something, and we fell asleep. And I woke up first in the morning, and the weather had been bad. The bad weather, the clouds, the planes couldn't, some of them couldn't fly, but on the 3rd day, the sun came out. And when I woke up around 4:30, 5 o'clock, the sun was just breaking and was beaming down through the holes in the roof into that cottage. And all of a sudden, bright rainbow lights just flashed and covered the whole cottage. And I looked on the floor, and there was an octagonal blue piece of crystal that the family owned. And it was lying there on the floor, and the sun rays were bursting it and just sending out glorious sunbeams. Freddie and Benny were still sleeping. And I said to myself, God has given me a message. I'm going to be all right. And I was, through 2 wars. And now I'm been told by my friends start talking, and I joined this wonderful group of Gem Back vets over in Ben Gardner, and with the help of doctors, and I'm now talking. I'm talking to schools, I'm talking to people, I'm talking to friends. It's hard. I still have post-traumatic stress. I had exercise this morning and I couldn't do it because I'm working on a speech that talks about some of the other worse atrocities that I witnessed. But war, all war, is hell. And the men who serve our nation deserve our honor, our respect, our love, and our gratitude. America is without question the greatest nation in the history of mankind. And to have anybody say that we're otherwise, that we're murderers because we dropped the atomic bomb or other things. Oh, sure, every once in a while, men get rage and men get mad. I got mad and I did some things I wish I had never did. But you do. But in general, the Americans are there to save the people, to stop the war, to get the bad guys, and to make this country the greatest country in God's earth. And I think we owe our debt of gratitude. And if you meet vets or have young people who are talking about going into the service, encourage them, thank them. And don't expect for them to be able to talk about some of the things like I've just begun. There are thousands of stories, but they're hard. You know.
Absolutely, Jim.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And that is a really, truly incredible story.
I didn't mean to go so long on that. But,
No, it's okay. It's an awesome story.
But that was the beginning for me, and my experiences being a prisoner of war, being captured and having my men tortured along with me, losing my memory, ending up in England and having my whole team. I have no surviving friends. No surviving friends. In not quite 9 years, and in just while I was in Europe, not Korea, I became a corporal and then a sergeant, and then I had nobody in charge, no lieutenants or anybody else. They made me team captain, and I was Rover 4 with a team of 18 to 24 men, or sometimes 14. And I was younger than everybody on my team who were experienced and older and married or gone to college and other things, and yet they respected me as a leader and called me the kid. I was purely blessed throughout the war, and I on my teams we had a total in 9 months between June 6, 44, D-Day, and when I was ended up in England in early April of 43, 3 weeks before the war ended in Europe. I was in a coma and unconscious for 45 days. And when I finally came to, I had absolutely no memory. I didn't even know my own name. And then I had truth serum and injections twice a day for the next 8 months to try to begin to get back with some of my records that they were using, some of my memory. And to this day, I still do not have at least a third of my memory. Friends, buddies' names. I kept manuals. I had 7 manuals by the end of the Korean War, and I wrote down everything. my experiences and the names of everybody, and their homes and their family names and their addresses, and when my mother had them in the lockers up in the attic at home, and I never touched them, I could never touch any of my stuff. She said, "What do you want me to do with all of your stuff?" And I said, "Mom, I can't handle it. I don't want anything. Just give it away. Throw it out." And those manuals, which right now I would love to have, went to the Salvation Army. I have no idea. But anyhow, I've had a wonderful life. Not even the war years were part of a wonderful life. Hard and horrible, but glorious because of what we were doing. And that's where I am on.
What would you say the hardest thing you've ever had to do is in the military?
Physically, I don't think there was, I
Look
ever
at
came
him.
to a breaking point. I think mentally, going, being deployed, knowing that you're saying goodbye to your family. When I was mobilized in 2004, my mindset was a little bit different. I was 36 years old. I wasn't an 18-year-old private going in. I already had a family. I had a career. The Army National Guard was a secondary career for me. So after 9/11, it really wasn't a huge surprise because there was a lot of Army Reserve and National Guard units that were being mobilized to fill in for active duty units because of manpower strengths. So when I got the call that our unit was being mobilized, of course it wasn't a surprise, but it was still, had a lot of anxiety because you didn't know really what was going on at that point. We were told that we were going to Iraq. It was going to be up to a 2-year mobilization, and pretty much put my life on hold. My kids at that point were 12, 14, and 16, and I don't think there's ever an easy age to be away from your family, but at that point in time, especially being teenagers, they definitely needed a father influence around the house. We had just signed a contract to have a addition put on our house, so that was another thing for my wife to have to deal with by herself, and it was definitely tough mentally, being apart. And finally, the day when it was, I was told I was going to be going on the advance party over to Iraq. The main body of my unit didn't come over for another month. But I was told, okay, tomorrow we're going to be flying over. You're one of the people that's going to be leaving early, and it was like the reality set in. And I knew I had to be strong for my family, but deep down it was hard. The uncertainty, especially at that point, with the casualties that were taking place every month. I mean, there wasn't a day on the news that you didn't watch that there was fatalities and numerous bombings, whether it was roadside bombings or mortar attacks. So it was a lot of stress that was involved. And for me, I can honestly say my faith is what got me through. I'd made a promise to myself every day, no matter how busy I was, I would always read a chapter of my Bible, and I did. I felt God's protection over me when I was apart, and we didn't have phone contact. I was at remote sites during my time over there, and we had field phones, and you couldn't make calls the way you could back to the United States if you were on a main FOB, which is a forward operating base. So I just had to put my faith and trust in God to say, okay, I'm here, I'm doing what is expected of me, and I can't worry about what I can't help out with at home. I'm just here to serve my time and make the best of it, and ask for protection, and it's every day. It was just pretty soon the days, it was like flipping through a book. It was like the time was just flying by, and before I knew it, 12 months in country had passed, and it was definitely a joyous feeling. But throughout my career, hands down, the toughest obstacle would have been just the mental aspect of being separated from your family and not, being there to see your kids' birthdays, Christmas. No, it was tough.
Yeah.
I can vouch for that. My team members who are married with kids, they were tremendous, and they went through hell that I couldn't even imagine, because I had myself and my responsibility. Of course, I wanted to live, but they had families. They had families and loved ones, and the hell of the horror of the savagery that exists in some of these wars. The atrocities in Japan were far worse than what I witnessed and endured in Germany. They were bad enough, but not the savagery and the savagery that we're now seeing with these jihadists. What our troops in the Middle East have gone through the last 20 years is just inhuman. And they're being deployed again and again, and too often and too long, and they need to get home. But we got a heck of a mess, and the world is in a dreadful shape. And America is the only nation that can really stop the madness. And I hope and pray that we'll get ourselves strong enough and together enough. I mean, at least in World War II, the whole nation, not originally, not in the beginning, but the whole nation by the end of 1945 and 46, boy, we had one solid, hard-working, everybody at home. It was all war, 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 war. Win it. And we don't have that today. And it's very hard on the troops who carry the load.
Indeed. Well, I'd like to thank you guys all for coming out here and speaking, and it was awesome having you guys. And thank you for your service. It truly means a great deal to, I'm sure, not just me. I'm sure it means a great deal to our whole country. Veterans Day is a time to pay respect and say thank you to those who have made sacrifices and served in this country's military forces. How about we don't let our gratitude fall only on November 11th? How about the next time you see a vet, smile and say thanks, regardless of what day it is? A little gratitude goes a long way. Until next time, I'm Scott Schenkel, and this has been the Viking Voice. Thank you guys again for coming. It's been awesome having you.